Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. It was 210 days ago that we launched the first iteration, the first PvE esport program for World of Warcraft. Now we're back. Now we're bigger and better than ever before with the 2018 edition. I am your host, Adrian Healingstat Archerlock, and joining me on this desk, we've got some true legends of the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, joined by Sloot and Jack, and boy, is it good to be back, gentlemen.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for so long, and just all the changes and the increased competition. Everyone's so serious about it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Seeing the growth of PvE sports, really. Seeing Dungeon Invitational being brought back with a roar in 2018. Very hyped to be a part of it again.
Yep, thousands of competitors competing throughout the Proving Grounds. Our new time trials, of course, played on the tournament servers, and now we've found our top 32 teams globally, 8 teams per region, and over the next 4 weeks, we will be determining who are the best teams, who are the top 8 teams in the world that will compete at our global finals. They'll actually be played here live from Columbus, Ohio. We'll have a lot of those faces that you might not recognize competing here, but I wanted to ask you guys, one of the big things, of course, was the addition of the time trials. How do you think that the preparation teams we're doing for the time trials will differ to what they're doing here at the regional finals?
I mean, it's going to be a bit different because, you know, they had all week, 24 hours a day to just do hundreds of pull on these dungeons if they wanted, try different comps, do whatever they needed to do. Here, I mean, it's a one-shot deal, you know, and there's a few wild cards. I mean, there's going to be different dungeons, and of course, we'll talk about that wildcard affix a bit later too, but it's almost limitless in how much they need to practice.
Yeah, and you're really seeing, you know, the time trials is that perfect environment. It's that, you know, clean environment where they can try as many times as they want to get these absolutely phenomenal, like, unbelievable times, really. But here, you know, the simplest mistake and it's over.
Yeah, and I mean, not only that, we have double the prize pool. We have double elimination, meaning double the content. We're going over 5 weeks for this. We've got 4 regional weekends before our global finals in June. So definitely a lot of content coming up. Double the hype, double the excitement, if you ask me. But one of the things that I really should ham down on is the fact that we, with that double elimination, will have an entire weekend to dedicate to China, which is our first one. That's what we're here for right now. And we'll be able to look at that, our China region. You can see the tournament format. A lot of things have changed. We're sticking with the best of 3, but we do have that double elimination. And of course, the thing that the teams are really playing for is that top 2 spot. They want to qualify for the global finals, really represent their region on the global stage. But I want to ham in on this China bracket because there are some big teams there, Sloot. If we look at this, we saw the Skyline D definitely being one of the big teams, 7th globally.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a huge deal. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, all eyes on them kind of thing is theirs to lose. But, you know, we talked about this earlier. There's a lot of different attitudes between the teams going into this. A lot of them want to make a statement that we're the best, look at our times, and some of them are just comfortable, you know, kind of getting by and finishing and qualifying, but definitely all eyes on Skyline D. But if we learned anything from last year, that any team can take it.
Yeah, and we can have a little look at that bracket now. We will be starting out with Skyline D, the #1 seed from China, going up against Firefang. Later in the day, we'll have CBA versus Skyline Top, Sun Sky versus Sheppy, and Ying 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 versus No Healer. Some interesting team names, of course, as we expect from the China region, but I think one of the big notable points here is that double elimination bracket, the fact that teams will have a second opportunity should they lose one of their best of 3s.
And that was one of the interesting things you're seeing, like team dynamics, where you're seeing, you know, like, oh, is, you know, tilt setting in? Is there going to be a little mistake here and there that's just going to sink you? You know, like we said, one mistake and you're out, but with this double elimination format, you know, you're having that extra chance. I'm really looking forward to seeing, you know, some of these teams who may have just fallen a little bit and they're going to make their way out of the losers bracket.
Yep, and we already said double the series, meaning, of course, every single region will have their own weekend. But the other thing we need to touch on is double the prize pool. Last year, $100,000, now $200,000 on the line for the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. 25,000 of that will be on the line today with these regional finals. So these teams not only competing for the, of course, the top 2 spot to get into that global finals. You can see they're also competing for the $6,000 or $4,000 before going into that $100,000 prize pool later on. Double the incentive, Jack. It's a lot to play for.
There's a lot to play for, especially in the regional stage. Like you said, you know, everything counts here. You know, we don't know what the seeding is going to be for the land, for example. So it's all on getting as much as really you're able to get out of these regionals. And like you said, make that statement that you're the best in the region and it's time to put the foot off the gas.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that we really need to talk about, of course, is it was only 240 days, like 30 weeks ago, that we started the PvE esports program for the first time. Now we're in April and we're already back here in the same desk, same people. I love it so much. But one of the things that we really do need to hem in on is there's been a lot of changes to the format. We saw the double elimination, that's obvious. We saw the prize pool, of course, as well. But there's actually been a lot of ways that the teams will lock in their characters and their affixes. Talk to us a little bit about how the character locking this year will impact the team's decision-making.
That's right. What you're seeing is for every best-of-3 series, teams are going to have to lock in their classes. And not necessarily their specs, but they have to lock in their classes for those best-of-3 series. So a lot of times you're going to be seeing, teams picking more comfort picks. We're saying, we're going to be going up against, 3 different dungeons. We know what the first one's going to be, and we'll have our second one that is going to be our pick if we end up losing, but we need to make sure that we're having something that's going to be comfortable, so that we don't even have to worry about our own pick. We're going to have something that's going to be a lot more comfortable for any dungeon, really, that's going to be in these pools.
Yeah, and I think one of the other interesting things in that sidebar there was the affixes, the way that they're going to be. I mean, last year we saw Seed of Triumphant being something where Blizzard was just like, hey, you guys are doing so well. Let's hammer you with the hardest dungeon and affixes we can. But now we thought we could go one better. Let's give the teams the opportunity to choose the affixes. How will that change this tournament format?
Yes, I mean, it's going to be really interesting because not only is it loser's pick for the maps now, but also the third affix for the second. And of course, if we go to the third map as well. We don't have all of the affixes to choose from, but there are 7. And it's going to be interesting to see the team kind of, mentality curveballs that they're going to throw out for things like, well, let's just throw Necrotic in there, let's throw Bursting in there, whatever it may be. So it's going to be a lot more strategy perhaps involved in trying to fake out the other teams. Or like we talked about last year a lot, there could be just a lot of, nothing too crazy with the affix choice, but we just practice this to death and we're ready to beat you.
Yep, it's going to be interesting to see whether they do hem in on those weaknesses or whether it's a little bit more just about the strategy for their own team. But we are going to look closely at that first series now. Skyline D, the #1 seed coming out of China, going up against Firefang, who are obviously looking to upset the cause in this phase. They came in last for China. I think there was a big variance between the teams qualifying in the time trials. Do you think that could speak to a variance in the skill of the teams, Jack?
Well, I really think so. When you're seeing, how much, the dedication really you're seeing out of these teams. You're seeing Skyline D just absolutely obliterating anyone else in the Chinese region and really making a statement, beating a lot of European teams. There was a lot of conversation when we were here at the start of the first MDI last time around about how great Europe was and how many teams were, at the high qualifying level. When you're seeing China making a statement, beating all of the North American teams, or so many of the North American teams, it really looks like they're going to be making a big push.
It's just such a different beast, It's so hard to really represent and prepare well for the actual MDI when it starts, regardless for all the qualifications. I mean, we do have the losers bracket to fall back on now, but, I mean, it's just one slip up and that could be the series right there.
And we can see, of course, the map pool that will be played for these first series. The way it's working is very similar to last year, actually, where we'll have one map pool played on 22s, I believe, for the first set of series, and then we'll move on to 23s with a different map pool and 24s, but the first map will be more of Souls. Now, we were talking a little bit about Skyline D in particular being a team that was running that double rogue composition. How do you think that will play out on more of Souls, Jack?
Maw of Souls, it's one of the nicest things when you're running for Maw of Souls. We're having Bursting, Quaking, and Fortified here. So there is going to be a lot of AoE damage going on, but if we're looking at what Skyline D qualified on, when they're having that double rogue, Havoc, I believe they had a Blood Decay and a Holy Pally, you have so many immunities and Paladins able to deal with the Bursting and Quaking so easily. So they have so many tools to be able to either heal, just straight heal through any of the Bursting or Quaking damage, or just immune it entirely.
Yeah, and I'm really excited for the double rogue. Myself, I am a fan of knives, so I do really like to see that coming out of these Chinese teams. Not something we'll necessarily see in the other regions, Sloot.
True, and just like last year, I mean, China had some pretty atypical comps, not what we're used to seeing kind of the meta, so to speak, especially in the Europe NA region. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, look, they made it work, if time trials are any proof, so it's going to be really good to see, and it just, especially for these affixes, just like we were talking about backstage, I mean, they're just built for making massive pulls and just immuning that Bursting right off.
So I think a lot of people will have seen, of course, on the time trials, some interesting compositions coming out, but I am hearing that we're ready to start the regional finals. The top 8 teams from China, it starts here. This is 2018 Mythic Dungeon Invitational, and we are ready to hop into that first map. It will be more of Souls, of course, that we are starting out on. The #1 seed, Skyline D, going up against Firefang, who are looking to upset the odds in this game 1.
I missed this dungeon, Jack. Should be a good time. So I think right out the get-go, we're going to see it. Probably something pretty similar in both teams, right? Skipping that first pack, hugging the right side of the bridge, and then would expect to see all the trash pulled with Imran.
Yep, and you're seeing, this is one of the dungeons you really want to start seeing that polish. This is, one of the first dungeons that we were really throwing at people in the time trials, so people should be no stranger to that. Like you said, watching out for the jailer. They actually get the imprison on that one bird that would cross the bridge, and just everything going into the boss right here, just pulling absolutely everything. And it looks like the other team taking just a little bit more time to do it.
No surprise here at all. Massive amounts of damage, single target damage coming in on Imran, of course, because of that Shuriken Storm from the rogues going down. No problem for the tank to handle out. Of course, the Blood DK scaling with that incoming damage for the Death Strike. All of that trash just falling so quickly. Imran, you know, pretty similar percents on both sides. Nothing too dangerous here. Interesting to see, though, double Resto Druid here, Jack.
Yeah, and you're seeing, you know, that's one of the nice things about Resto Druid, though, is, you know, when you're not relying too much, for example, on, you know, where you're able to actually get a really strong setup for all the bursting going out. So you want to see like huge healing coming out right here as that Blood DK is just dropping so low here, and being able to get that good setup. A lot of mobile heals. You know, you don't really have to worry about any like raw casts, and it's very easy to stay very mobile here. With so many times you're going to be able to shift out of any of the routes, for example, on the trash packs, and get really easy spells on top of that.
So now the Resto Druid there did spawn some of those ads a bit too far away from Imran. Of course, those swirlies do spawn where players stand. Failed to come close to the tank. No problem picking it up, though. Did well to kite it past the tank within range of that D&D or the Blood Boil, of course. Both teams pretty similar here. However, pulling ahead of Skyline D, no surprise there, because just so used to a huge chunk on the tank. Procs Perg right there. Luckily saves himself with a huge DS right after, and they're getting ready to hit that horn as soon as Imran goes down in just a moment.
Yeah, you're seeing the phenomenal positioning there, and you are seeing one of the DPSs going down right here. So much damage right as, you know, Skyline D is taking the boss down and moving so quickly here.
Yep, so they're moving over down into the bowels of the ship, of course, looking to stealth past this first trash pack where we typically see teams pull a lot of this together. Now, it's very dangerous here. It looks like they're prepping to kind of pull everything together here. They're getting it ready to rock the boat. Now, we do have to watch out for these mobs. They're very dangerous for the tank, and especially crammed in here with the quaking, lots of residual damage on the group.
Now you're seeing Incarn here taken by the Resto Druid, you know, right as they're pulling into the Mariner there. And they finally getting Imran down there for Firefang, but Incarn just being able to put out so much healing here. Very great preparation. You're seeing Darkness going down as well. You're really packed in together. So, you know, having the largest CDs possible that you're able to prepare for that huge damage, get the Mariner down, and still, you're looking at Firefang just kind of struggling to catch up.
Yeah, this is the pull that we were talking about earlier. You know, they opted to kind of stealth past Skyline D. That is, Firefang opts to kind of just pull everything here. There's just so much dangerous damage, not only on the tank, but on the trash too, with that Defiant Strike going out, a lot of the muck water being thrown out too. So, not to mention, of course, the Quake bursting on top of it. We do know that one of the most dangerous mobs down here, Jack, especially from the healing perspective, is that Mariner with that Lantern.
Yeah, and you were seeing Skyline D just a masterful job by the Resto Druid, taking, you know, popping Incarnation, having it for the full duration of the Mariner's 2 Lanterns. Such a lethal mechanic there, and the huge healing requirement. And you're not really able to get any hard casts off if you're having Quaking going off periodically. So it's just so much damage in a really tight area. And thankfully you're having Darkness, you're having the Rogues of Fane, you have so much damage reduction that's available to you, in addition to that Blood DK Leech, and it's just allowing them to mow down this.
And a death over here on Firefang for the tank side. Luckily, they get him right back up. They're able to continue here. Meanwhile, Skyline D pulling just ahead up to those 2 champions right before Harbor Run. Now, a lot of these mobs can't be hard CC'd, including these champions. They have to watch out and make sure that they're kicking their fear, respectively. Otherwise, they will fear everyone within a certain radius. And, of course, the tank could easily drop at that moment. Skyline D kind of struggling to pick themselves up here. They have had a full wipe. They have 9 deaths. Keep in mind, Jack, based on last year, I mean, it's so easy to just fall behind just by deaths too. That's 45 seconds in such a short map that they need to make up here.
And like you said, it's such a short map here where, you know, any little mistake you so easily fall behind. What I love to see out of Skyline D, though, is just the amount of cleave that they're able to get onto these champions. To be able to funnel and just tunnel these champions down, making it so much easier on the entirety of the group. It was really nice to see the Resto Druid, for example, holding his distance just in case the worst happened. If any of the, for example, any of the casts went through, just to make sure that, you know, he's able to pump out that extra dispel, and then he's able to come into melee and do a little bit more damage as they're going on to Harbor Run.
Of course, so they do, of course, pull the trash to the side, res the tank. In the meantime, Skyline D moving up to the second boss of the dungeon, Harbor Run, where we can expect to see a few important abilities here. We do have that Scythe going out, which is very important to dodge, does a ton of damage. Of course, he does spawn this Servitor that you have to make sure you interrupt very frequently, otherwise it will pulse for a huge amount of damage on the raid. A little area denial here as well with the Nether Rip, which will force players to go around the side of the room. And of course, Jack, the final ability, which is the mobs that stun and spawn based on one of the players.
Yeah, it's especially deadly fragment that Harbor Run will cast into a player, stunning them for a brief period of time, and spawning lots of ads that like to spread out. So it's nice to know how the DK there, get the Mass Grip inside, but we're about to actually approach a pretty dangerous area where you're going to have the combination of the Servant spawning in addition to the fragment here. So And really, it looks like the Firefang is just struggling to catch up.
Firefang, you know, doing a pretty typical pull that we saw a lot of teams at the time trials do, where we pull those 2 champions up to Harboron right now, making sure that they interrupt. Of course, they have to interrupt both of those champions, and they do have a death going down right now again. So that's going to cost them another 5 seconds. I don't think they have that battle. They certainly don't have that battle res available. Remember, we do have it different in the battle res system now, ever since it's been done. And in the meantime, Skyline D just chewing through Harboron.
Yeah, they're playing so flawlessly. I mean, they had the fragment, which was closely followed by the servant coming out. They just absolutely annihilated the fragment, getting huge damage there. Right as Firefang is just having even more deaths.
Yeah, they had trouble keeping up, of course, with all the interrupts there. Little sloppy play from them. That's going to set them back. I mean, at this point, we're in a position where Skyline D already has to kind of make up. And there it is, the full wipe over from Firefang. They fully capsize. They're going to have to come back up and deal with Harboron. In the meantime, of course, upstairs, Skyline D working on harboring all of their strength and finishing off the second boss so that can move to what I would expect to be a full ship pull up to Skjol, which is that mini-boss prior to Helia.
That's right, and you're seeing Harboron here at 4%, and you're just absolutely burning them down so easily. You're having, you know, all the little fragment adds that are coming out. They're just making sure they're getting a lot of cleave damage, just focusing in on it. But the cast starts going off from the servant, and it actually does take down the Demon Hunter.
Lucky takes down Demon Hunter and procs that cheat death on one of the rogues, so he will be vulnerable now for the coming ship. Now, if they're expected to pull most of the ship, they will be rushing forward along one of the sides, but they're actually playing it safe and hanging back in the meantime. So we'll have to see what their pull pattern is here in just a moment as they spread out for that quaking. In the meantime, of course, Firefang moving back up to Harboron for their second go at it, this time without Trash, making it a bit easier for themselves. They do indeed move down the side of the ship, pull that extra champion on the right side, and I assume we'll be doing a very big pull here. Now, they have to be very careful to get a lot of these interrupts, because not only are there fears, but there's a ton of heals, such as the tide that needs to go out, the torrent.
Yeah, then you're seeing the torrent, the puddle, the AoE radius that will splash onto other characters, you know. As you're seeing, it actually dropped through both of the rogues so low, and one of them had already proc cheat death, and it almost killed him there. You know, you have to be so careful when you have so many characters in melee. I mean, even if you want to get your Rested Druid into Feral Affinity, for example, get in some extra swipes, getting a little bit extra damage there. As you're seeing, a Druid has to really keep his distance because he's not able to safely get in there, and he's popping Incarn as everyone's dropping super low. It's really paying off. Usually most Druids will be taking something around Cultivation, but the Incarn pick is really paying off for the mobility, being able to have the instant cast regrowth, and also just the huge extra healing that he's able to pump out.
Right, Gerard Jack, and of course, typically we do see that Blood DK having so much self-sustain, of course, pumping out that consumption leech for everybody in the group during these high burst periods. They do handle that quite well. I don't think they actually pulled Skjol yet, so they'll have to kind of round around and finish up the rest of the trash, as we do see they've only completed 79%, now 82% of the trash. Harboron, of course, now at 23% for Firefang. Looks like they have things under control this time.
Yeah, I really love the decision by Skyline D, for example, to not pull Skjol, because when you have so much of your group concentrated in just such a tight area, it really adds to more risks. And that's really not what Skyline D even really needs right now. They have one death going into Skjol, and they are just so far ahead of Firefang right now. Firefang about to take down Harboron. He's at 10% or about right now.
Yeah, so they still need to deal with that entire ship now. In the meantime, of course, Skyline D has pulled Skjol along with the remaining trash that they've, I'm sure, perfectly calculated ahead of time to know what they need for the trash. That fog wall will not actually go down until they have killed the trash that they need, so they can't actually kind of pull it onto Helia or anything like that. So they will be stuck here for a moment finishing that trash. We do see that huge pull come in now from Firefang as well. We'll have to keep an eye on how they handle things.
I love what Skyline D is doing right now. Skjol will actually target, you know, a certain character and then start teleporting to them and have a very large slash. You're seeing the Demon Hunter there just ran out, baited it out there, made sure it was getting out of the group, and nobody else even has to worry about it. As the tank is dropping so low here. He doesn't quite per proc, but
he goes down. We're going to have a death from the Rogue too. Immediate battle. Was that a battle res or did he release there?
I think he released.
I think he released. So
yeah,
they're going to have a bit of a sloppiness here. This is a Firefang's opportunity to jump on right away. Of course, they're doing the kite back to the ship as these mobs do hit substantially hard at the end. Huge dip on the Rogue there as well. Skyline D scrambling to get back to Helia's gate in just a moment.
Yeah, and you're seeing, you know, this is, you know, the first little misstep there by Skyline D. They're getting everything back together. You know, they're making sure that they're able to get these mobs cleaned up. And, you know, still, Skjol does have so much health. It just takes such a long time to be able to burn down. And that's really the way that you can start, you know, slowly slipping here and there, where you make these little mistakes and just one person gets one shot. You know, the tank goes down. You know, that's the opportunity that Firefang is going to really need to keep in this game.
Slippery indeed, and we know it's slippery when met on this deck right now. They do manage to not have a full wipe, of course. They manage to kite it back well as the tank and the Rogue join them again. again, and then they jump down to Helia. We do have a bit of RP here. We do know, of course, Helia is a two-phase fight. We will first have to kill 6 of the tentacles, 2 different types of tentacles. One of them will, of course, be the grasping that don't do anything, just hang out around the side of the ship. And then, of course, the tank tentacle, the destructor in the middle that does a ton of damage to the tank. Any 6 that you kill will proc her second phase.
You're seeing, just the focus there, getting really, really good position here where you're able to just cleave onto all the tentacles right off the start there. The Druid, again, going into that cat form, able to pump out so much damage with the swipes and getting all the Moonfire, Sunfires up there on all of them.
So now we do have to be careful, of course. They do have to choose the correct side of the ship, which you can see based on which arm Helia is casting with. Otherwise, they will take a massive nature hit, likely killing some of the DPS. They do well to avoid it. In the meantime, the tank has to be careful to pick up the new destructors that spawn, else they will hit somebody else nearby, or if nobody's within melee range, they will pulse for extra damage, which can be pretty gnarly.
Yep, and if you get more of an aerial view on the deck, you'll be able to see where they're really, really hugging in on the sides of the ship there. There is, the little safe areas that you're seeing. These tentacles are spawning in seemingly random locations. There's definite areas where they will not spawn. You're seeing, areas right next to where a tentacle has already come up. They will not be. And also the edges of the ship are such safe zones, and it's avoiding any kind of, little misstep here and there by playing extra safe.
Of course, we do see Firefang is really out to sea right now. They're still kiting the same pack around in circles. They're kind of opting to do a death run here, just trying to finish off everything they can by constantly dying and releasing. They have 28 deaths on the board. That's going to be immensely costly. I mean, we have a 2-minute differential between the teams right now. Helia transitioning to her second phase now for Skyline D. I mean, this is Skyline D's to lose. There's no way they lose this unless they wipe probably multiple times here.
Yeah, and you're seeing, the innovator that was going out there by the rest of Druid on himself, just making sure that he's able to get as many hots prepared for this dead period of time, because when the boss comes out, he wants to be able to focus solely on dealing as much damage as possible here.
So we do know, of course, in the second phase that there is a 2-interrupt rotation if you're a melee or tank needed for Helia's cast. Otherwise, there will be a massive AoE nuke on the raid here, avoiding her frontal Beth, which covers 1/3 of that remaining part of the ship in the meantime. Now, you do have about a minute, if I'm not mistaken, before she will go downstairs for a 20-second intermission. That's kind of the timer that a lot of groups try to beat, one of those intermissions. So we'll see if they're able to put a lot off here, especially seeing that it is not tyrannical at the moment.
That's right. And, even when you're in a tyrannical situation, there becomes such a focus on, safety. As you're watching the positioning, as you guys are all staying really, really close together. And both the rogues were sitting in the middle of the boss room, and they're going to be moving back here right now. That's always going to be one of the safest areas, is that dead center right up against the boss. And you're seeing that one of the rogues running out, getting his Dispel off, coming back in. He's not, for example, just going to be harming any of his other players. They're really recognizing when they have mechanics and not kind of stepping on each other's toes, letting their team do as much damage as possible. Really, really great teamwork here.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Helia does finish at around 70.5%, so they don't need to get all the way to 0. A lot of damage coming out of the DPS, but also the tank and the healer. I mean, that Resto Druid is doing some damage there. Unfortunately, they do not manage to finish her off before the phase, buying Firefang an extra 20 seconds, but I think at this point it's just way too little, way too late.
And you're seeing Skyline D just has excellent preparation. You're seeing Effervescence going down. The Druid just spending full time putting up as many hots as possible, because once the boss comes back up, they're just focusing it as hard as possible. And just an excellent, excellent job here by Skyline D. That was the polish that we were talking about on game 1.
Almost. They slot 4 deaths. They had a bit of, slippery win situation upstairs, but I mean, no problem. They take it 1-0 in the series.
But they got caught up just a little bit on the ship. Until then, it was obviously going very well. Firefang, on the flip side, they were the number 8 seed coming out of China. I think they had a little bit of a rough start. It looked like they were bringing it back just a little bit, but that was a lot of deaths at the end.
Well, where they actually had the most mistakes at was where it didn't really matter as much. When they're having a couple deaths there on Skull, they're able to have everybody running back, kiting back to the tank. Tank gets aggro back, and you're able to kind of reset there and just kind of stabilize, right? They never had a full team wipe the way that Firefang did on Harbron. So, a lot of those areas, the bottom of the boat, they played perfectly. The top of the boat, they had everything but Skull played just about as perfectly as possible. You really saw, how everyone was really working together, making sure they're not kind of stepping on each other's toes. And even when the cheat death was procced on one of the rogues, he never actually died, even though it had been procced. So it's just such clean play at a Skyline D for the first map.
Yeah, and I think More of Souls is about a 24-minute, I think, roughly run, and they did it in, what was that, just under 14 minutes? So presumably, looking at the other regions, that's quite a reasonable time on a global kind of attempt when you're going for your first map.
Yeah, I mean, they did well. There's no two ways about it. They struggled a bit with that Skjall area at the end, but I mean, they did well to recover. Everyone kited back. If been a pretty significant time dump if they allowed it to reset, because they had already hammered so much damage into some of that trash and skull. But they did well. If anything went wrong, they looked like they were very composed. They knew exactly what they needed to do, exactly how they needed to get out of this situation, and that's all it takes.
Not only the health reset, but it's also the way that they're trying to pump out as much damage as possible, because they have those double rogues. They're trying to get the double Shuriken Storm there to pump more single target damage in. So not only do you have to do all that health pool again if they did let it reset, but you also lost a good portion of the mobs that are giving them those extra combo points to just funnel in more eviscerates.
Yeah, and talking about the damage, that's one of the things I really wanted to pick up on, is because in the time trials we saw a lot of Holy Paladins, but actually both the teams here opting for that Restoration Druid. Jack, how do you think, well, why do you think they brought in the Restoration Druid, and how do you think they did? Because he was pumping out a fair bit of damage.
It's huge amount of damage, and it was also in very key areas, right? So you saw, for example, the Incarnation coming out for the Mariner, the Incarnation coming out for the huge boat pull on the top floor, right? Those are the areas where there's not really a lot of damage going out at all, because you need to focus as hard as you can on the healing aspect of it and having the largest CDs possible to keep everybody alive, because even though you do have a lot of faith in your rogues or in your demon hunters for the immunities or damage reduction, there's no avoidance here. You're not and you want to focus as much as you can on the damage. But once that phase passed and you're going on to Helia, he spent all of his dead time putting up as many hots as possible, extending with Flourish, and then just tunneling damage as hard as he could.
Yeah, and I think one of the really cool things that I saw is that Noggin Fogger, actually, when you're in cat form, you're still a skeleton. I didn't realize that. But looking at the next game now, of course, the format has changed, so I really do want to dive into that a little bit. They're going to have to stay on the same characters. We talked about that, the same classes, therefore. But they do, of course, Skyline D, now that they've won, it gives Firefang the opportunity to choose the affix and the map going into the next one. So what do you expect to see coming out of them in this next game?
It's tough to say. I mean, they can try to counter some of the melee comp with, let's say, throwing an explosive in there. Necrotic would kind of play to both teams badly. I mean, I don't think either team would gain a substantial advantage with Necrotic. There are a few affixes they could choose. It's tough to say because there's one of two options here. They're going to try to throw a curveball and throw Skyline D, completely out of it, or they're going to go with a comfort pick that they think they've practiced very well and that they could beat Skyline D in, which is actually last year we ended up seeing more of, picking those comfort picks, some of the easier maps.
Yeah, and the map pool, of course, is 7 maps. We've seen one of them, More of Souls. They have 6 maps to choose from, also 7 affixes. And just to clarify, because, of course, there has been lots of changes, you get to choose that map. It will still be a 22 affix because we're in the first pool of maps. And then 2 affixes are decided by Blizzard per map, and then the third and final affix will be selected. Now, both these teams ran quite similar compositions, but I think one of the things you would target, perhaps, is that double rogue. Is there any affixes, really, that really might hit hard when it comes to Skyline D?
Well, as you talked about with the Necrotic, where you're saying, I'm going to pull all these mobs into the boss or into, Skull or any of the mini-bosses and stuff like that, and I'm going to make sure that I'm able to funnel in as much single-target damage as possible as a result of that. But what Sloot also really mentioned is that doesn't really help Firefang out as much either, because they're running into a kind of similar situation there. So I think we are going to see something that's going to be more of a comfort pick for them. It's not going to be, an absolutely punishing affix that, most people on live servers are going to be very uncomfortable with. It's probably going to be something that they're going to like and they're going to find is going to be most favorable to them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point as well, talking about the live servers, because these guys, of course, they are playing on the tournament servers, right? We talked about this a little last year, but I guess we haven't touched on it too much just this year. One of the things of the time trials, of course, was that an increased number of people got access to that tournament server, which was awesome. They got to play all the characters, get their keys with those kind of hacky little ways of getting it from the vendor. But that's something, of course, that these guys are playing on. They do have that level playing field, so it really does come down to the skill. But it looks like Dreamliner, Game 1, Skyline D, playing an incredibly good series. Almost a perfect run, just 3 or 4 deaths at the end there. China #1 looking very, very strong with that start and go. But the Mythic Dungeon Invitational 2018 has kick-started, and it is Skyline D that have the advantage. Join us after this quick break to see if they can pull it through to the semi-finals.
Adrian, what do you want me to do? What do you
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You join us at an exciting time. We're halfway through, potentially our first series of the day and our first series of 2018 when it comes to the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. Our #1 seed, Skyline D, having a dominating performance on More of Souls. I am Adrian Healingstad Archlock, and I will be your host throughout the weekend. Joining me are fab analysts. We have Snoot and Jack once again. Jack, very happy to see the the Restoration Druids coming out in that last one.
Yeah, it was great to see, and it was also just a nice pick for what the dungeon was really presenting with them. Where they're seeing, you want to be able to be very mobile, you want to be able to have, the frequent instant cast, incarnation, the pick there, is usually not taking all that much on, some of the more 22s that you usually see, usually something like Cultivation, but the incarn was just perfect for what they were doing because you want to be able to have the instant cast regrowths, stronger rejuves, all that stuff, which works so well for the team.
Yeah, and China's #1, Skyline D, having a good performance on More of Souls. Salute. Why do you think they were able to deal with this dungeon, these affixes, so well?
I mean, we talked about it a bit earlier about it, and even during the break a bit too. They had that kind of survivable melee. They had the immunities going on. But one of the things, Jack, you and I discussed, we were really expecting some Holy Paladins out the gate, but they had really good control in terms of their bursting stacks. Not too many times in the dungeon did they reach an insane amount of stacks that they all plan to pre-immune, just because of the nature of probably their practice and exactly just how the classes work. To have 4 or 5 stacks they would clear by the time the higher health mobs in the pack would die, and then so on. So it made it a bit easier for the rest of Druid as a result.
It absolutely did, because you have that consistency factor that you're able to actually predict what the damage is going to be, how you're going to be reacting to it, and it requires a lot less time on the hand of the rest of Druid, where you actually have to be focusing on the damage, because you can just say, I'm going to start focusing the single target damage here, making sure I get this mob down, because a lot of it was just the Shuriken Storms cleaving into single target damage. You're only getting a couple stacks here and there, and it wasn't too much of a worry about it. You're just letting your Wild Growth or your Sarah's Gift just top off a lot of that.
Yeah, and of course now Firefang, the underdog team, the #8 from China, will have the map advantage and affix advantage, I suppose, as we look at this pool. Of course, we have Darkheart Thicket, Court of Stars, Netharian's Lair, Vault of the Wardens, Eye of Ashara, and Upper Karazhan up for grabs in this next choice. But one of the other things we were discussing just a little bit in the break is that not only are you selecting the map, also the affixes change completely per the map, so it's really hard to prepare or even predict what your opponent's going to choose.
Yeah, last year we kind of had set affixes for the stage in the tournament, whereas now we have a situation where all the maps have different affixes plus that wild card.
And it's nice in that way, because you're able to have that consistency factor where you're just saying, oh, I practice for 2 or 3 different versions of Court of Stars or something like that. You say Court of Stars has these affixes, these 2 affixes all the time. Then the loser is able to add in that 3rd affix there. So in a preparation side, it's very, very nice. But you also have to make sure that your team's a lot more well-rounded to handle that under a bunch of different circumstances.
So I'm hearing in my ear that we do have the map choice and the affix choice, and it's very interesting to me. So Nell's Lair is going to be the map Netharian's Lair in its full term, but the affix choice, you kind of guessed it before, it is going to be that Necrotic for the road.
Right.
So tell us, Snoot, why is the Necrotic the choice coming out of the team playing against this double road?
So of course, Necrotic is very dangerous because melees will apply stacks to the tank that decreases healing done to that target by 3% per stack and adds a nature dot as well. Eventually, at 34 stacks, or well, 33, but technically 34, the tank will become unhealable. You know how that goes. And once that happens, I mean, they're kaput. So we're going to see a lot more defensive strats coming from the tank and a lot of kiting involved, or just kill it before it kills you kind of strategy.
Yep, healer's fault, as we always know.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, and one of the scary things about it is if you're going to be locking in your class, how are you going to be able to get those extra slows out? I mean, you're going to have the Death and Decay from Tightening Grip, where you're able to have, some slows there, but after that, they're just going to be sprinting right after you. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of times where Team Skyline is really focused on bringing everything into the boss. When you have to actually deal with Necrotic on top of that, it really starts to concern in their head maybe, where you're saying, well, how are we best able to deal with this? How are we best able to keep on consistently dropping our stacks, especially if it's going to be Fortified and Grievous, which I believe it is.
Yeah, I was going to say, Fortified is the other affix, of course. We're not going to have Tyrannical just yet, leaving it on the bench for now, but Grievous going alongside that Necrotic, that's an interesting combination, one that definitely the tanks and healers are going to have to really work hard to deal with.
Yeah, well, thankfully, we're not starting off our Chinese series with a Tyrannical Rock Mora, right? So the Fortified
Yes.
Grievous, where you're having to take, all that extra damage and trying to heal through the Grievous dot on a tank. It's very nice that you're going to be able to have, for example, the Blood Decay, where they can have huge chunks and huge bursts of healing onto themselves to help clear that out. But when you're adding in that extra layer of saying, well, we also have to deal with Necrotic, we also have to deal with kiting, that adds an extra, complication, really, to the team.
It's going to be really scary on the tank if they reach too many stacks of Necrotic with that Grievous ticking. I mean, that's going to be really dangerous. There's a double dot that could chew through that, you know, the AMS, whatever cast coming out of the mobs too. And, you know, typically last year we saw Neltharion's Lairs. I mean, the first pull of the dungeon was just everything to the edge of the cliff. They might be able to do that, but, you know, the DK will run in there, grab everything, and then get right out of there before reaching all those
One
stacks.
of the most scary things about that is also when you're having your tank just running away as rapidly as they can. Usually they're unhealable at that point. So you have them taking the ticking dot from Necrotic as well as Grievous at the exact same time. So it's just such a huge fight for the healer.
And it looks like we are ready to get into game. Nell's Lair will be the second choice coming out of course, Firefang, the number 8 seed from China. They really need to get their teeth stuck into this next game, or they are going to get burned by the coming out number 1, Skyline D. They were number 7 globally, and they're showing it in this series so far.
Well, Dick,
want to see them prove it once again.
Down the water hole we go in a second. Everyone's favorite part of the dungeon. So now, you know, it's funny. Some of the most dangerous parts in the dungeon are not really some of the things we talked about, like the pelters coming up. You know, we kept focusing on Necrotic. Nothing too necrotically dangerous about those, but they're very dangerous, of course, in a fortified setting for the rest of the party. So we'll have to deal with that post first boss. Really interested to see how the two teams come with the pulls here, because there are a lot of these small shale spiders hanging around. Tons of mobs up here, and of course, with those necrotic stats, it's gonna be really dangerous. We already see them stacking up on the 2 blood DKs.
And you're seeing the huge pull coming out here. They do seem to be, oh, here they are pulling into the Hulks, of course, having that very, very huge pull. And really, you're seeing you going in there with AMS up. The Necrotic is starting to stack up here and trying to make sure they're getting as much damage as they can in the middle of that stun. You're going to see all the Necrotic stacks start going up very, very rapidly once the answering weapon falls.
So we do see there was a reset and a delay. We're only at 7 stacks here for Skyline D right now. They're starting to kite a bit already. Now, those Hulks are very dangerous. They do get them down quite well. They do have a massive frontal, and after that frontal, if not interrupted or displaced, they will do a frontal magic cone that hits the tank extremely hard. And you want to make sure it doesn't hit the tank, because if it chews through that AMS that they're trying to use to drop their Necrotic, it's going to be pretty devastating.
And you're seeing there, they're just doing an excellent job getting the Hulk down so rapidly, even as there's 6 deaths already for Firefang here. And it just really shows, you know, this is Firefang's pick. This is the pick that they were feeling most comfortable with to actually take down Skyline D, and they're already off to a rough start.
Yeah, I would say at this point they just need to kind of chill out, take it easy, and not try anything outside their comfort zone, because it's going to cost them. It's still early in the dungeon. They still have a chance to catch up, but at this point, Skyline D's already downstairs, pulled some of those drudges down with them, and they're starting the RP for that first boss.
Oh, I love what they're doing here. I mean, this is something we talked about, right? Is pulling those extra mobs in, that they're able to funnel in more single target damage. But also you have to think about with Rockmora is you are going to have the little skitter ads that are going to be there that are also going to be adding more and more to Necrotic.
Now, the very dangerous play here is keeping those ads alive just for the rogue damage is going to add a ton of necrotic stacks to that DK, already well passing 10 stacks, 30% healing MS. Now, Rockmora is no stranger here. Very dangerous. Now, we are in a fortified setting, not tyrannical, as you said. Now, things to watch out for on this boss, of course, are those spiders, as you mentioned, that spawn. Every spider that's alive when he does his AoE smash will increase the damage of that AoE smash. He does also have a frontal that we have to be careful about, and when those spiders are killed, they will leave that poison cloud on the ground.
Yeah, but you're seeing there's excellent position there by the Druid. You know, he just actually used the Typhoon there. He's just trying to make sure that he's able to have always have the melee in between himself and any skitter as a pop-up, because usually you're going to see the rest of the Druid getting in there.
And it looks like we're having another wipe coming up in a moment on Firefang. I mean, they're really struggling. They're not able to get this big pull down with all the necrotic. At this point, they should really just pull slowly and get to the first boss. In the meantime, Rockmore already at 20% for Skyline D. I mean, you know, rock, paper, scissors here. Rocco wins. They are still alive. They're doing an excellent job kiting around, getting the punts where needed during Rockmore's kind of RP phase where he does an AoE smash, allows the tank to get away just in time, get some of those necrotic stacks dropped, and then they're going to go down the river right in just a moment.
It's still, the drudges, like some of the drudges outlive Rockmora. Excellent control there, excellent practice. You know, it almost was like they already knew what was going to be their counter pick, and they were already ready to respond accordingly.
And of course, going down here in the river ride, they're having a barrel of fun right now. But still on Firefang's side, tons of issues. They still haven't dealt with that giant. Scorpions are still running amok right now. They have a huge hole to climb out of. In the meantime, of course, there's a lot of different pull patterns here coming up for this trash leading up to the second boss. Now, what do you think they're going to do? I think by the looks of it, they're already kind of starting to hug the right side, avoid a lot of these pelters. The pelters that I talked about earlier are just a nightmare for healers.
Yeah, and you're seeing there, they're just making sure they're getting the breakers entrapped and sapped, all that stuff, just to make sure that you're able to get these all together as rapidly as you can. Because one of the big struggles, especially as a healer, is when your tank wants to get any of the early mobs to try to get all of them together, you have such a delay where you have to be separated from your tank for such a long period of time here, and that's really not what you want. You want to be able to have the tank that he's doing right here, he's using the Sky Step potion there to get the extra speed, getting all these mobs in together. Everyone's really, really far back, and he even is pulling the Hulk as well. It's just an absolutely giant pull here.
Yes, I'm expecting to see, of course, that Aegrim. Now, they have to watch out for the front of that Hulk, as we discussed upstairs as well. They're going to get as much damage as they can with this AoE stun down from the DH, and then I would assume that they're going to start kiting immediately, not only for the health of the rest of the group, so the Pelters and the Breakers don't get too much damage out on everyone with those avalanches, but also just to make sure that the tank doesn't die from necrotic. Excellent control, huge damage coming in from everyone. That DH just pumping it out. Everything goes down, and they're ready to move on towards the second boss.
It was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, right as we were talking about how much damage the Hulk can deal, how much of an inconvenience he can be doing, the Rogues just absolutely single target and just obliterate it right away.
Now, they're killing this drummer off, of course. He did insult them earlier, so they're making sure that he gets out of the way completely. In the meantime, we are seeing Rockmora spawning in a moment down for Firefang. They are off to a very rocky start, though, so it's going to be really interesting to see how they're going to be able to climb out of that, if they are even. In the meantime, of course, Skyline D moving up towards Ularog, the second boss of the dungeon.
Yeah, and you're seeing here another frequently used pull, another frequent pull that you're getting out of this. I also really love what the rest of Druid has been doing. Like what I was talking about, where you have to worry about the distance that you're able to have to your tank. You want to be able to stay close to them, but not in the way. Having the stealth out of the rest of Druid, whereas the Paladin is not going to be able to have that option, allows you to stay close while also not be inconveniencing, the tank or messing with pulling any threat here and there.
Now, typically here we do see in Ularog's room that we just have a mass AoE grip to the middle of the room. Everything gets cleaved down. Typical to what we've been seeing, earlier from Skyline D's play. Rockmore, of course, being chiseled through down on the right side of the screen, 50%. Now, they seem to be pretty stable at the moment, not having any troubles, keeping those shale spiders under control in the meantime. And now we are seeing, as I aforementioned, this big pull for Skyline D right in front of Ularog.
Yeah, one of the most deadly things here, and you're seeing the huge damage going out on the Druid and on the Demon Hunter there, is the Shapers. The Shapers that are going to be having any of the Stone Bolts that are going out dealing so much damage. It's 22, so it's not necessarily going to be one-shotting, but you're seeing the same strategy is being used here. Again, focusing down this Hulk. This Hulk is getting really, really low very rapidly, and he's not even going to make it out of the room. They are seeing there still is a lot of damage going out. Very good awareness there by the Demon Hunter, being able to immune any of the Stone Bolt that was going out on him, being able to dodge that attack, and such a clean play.
And both Rogues with that synchronized death from above there, right. Perfectly timed. They're getting ready to pull the second boss. Now let's have a chat about the second boss here. We do know that we inevitably will get to that transition phase because he starts with such high percentage. There are a few abilities you have to watch out for. He will summon a couple totems that you should nuke out of the way quickly just to make sure there's not too much AoE on the group. The tank can intelligently turn him 90 degrees to make sure that those totems are stacked. There will be some hands that come up and will clamp the players if you don't move out in time. And of course, there is a nuke on the tank. Now, of course, at 100 energy, as I said, Jack, he will go downstairs and we'll have to have a little guessing game of ball under cup.
It's my favorite game. And you're seeing that 90-degree turn, just like you said. Getting the totems stacked up together, and the rocks that are falling down, because they have such a large melee composition, they want to make sure you're not going to be dropping more rocks on top of each other, stacking it up even further there. And so here comes the totem game, making sure they're able to watch it, and watch which one they need to be focusing down here.
Well, I certainly haven't been watching it all, so let's head over to Firefang, going down the barrel right in the meantime. It does look like Skyline D has had the correct. We'll find out in a second. Actually,
there we go.
Get the correct one. Ularog packs back up. Now he is giving them a hand with those stone hand formations under them. They will have to be careful to avoid those, as I mentioned earlier. Now they have a complete reset on his energy bar. I don't think they'll be able to get him down before the next reset. I think they will have one more downstairs phase, while in the meantime we're seeing a pretty similar skip from Firefang, avoiding the right side of the room on the way to Ularog, and likely what will be another big pull from them.
Yep, and one of the biggest concerning things, though, is they don't have the level of damage onto the Hulks that, for example, Skyline D did. The Hulks usually are something that are going to be, they're not going to be slowed this way everything else will, so they end up just running all the way to the tank, and the tank just ends up fighting them alone while everyone takes down the rest of those mobs. You're seeing Firefang here just getting all these mobs focused down, and they are doing a pretty good job. You do have to be watching out, and you're seeing that same positioning out of the rest of Druid, making sure that they're able to get a focus in on. And I love what the Druid's doing here. He's getting the constant entangles, the constant roots onto the Hulk to try to keep everything a little bit more tightly packed in together.
Now, Firefang is doing quite well here with this pull. This is the kind of pull that we were expecting to see out of them. They're kiting well, they're damaging well. The Hulk does go down. He does get that frontal cast off, but I think the tank was out of range, so not too much damage. They do actually have another death there, unfortunately. That's going to be another 5 seconds penalty, plus, of course, the run back for that DPS. As alluded to earlier, Skyline D does have a second transition phase where they will have to correctly guess the totem in order for the boss to pop back up. I'll assume they shouldn't have too much issue. Getting chunked down immensely there by the double DFA coming down from the Rogues. Ularog pops back up to say hello, and they should have no problem finishing him off in just a moment.
Yeah, but it's, the nice control that you're seeing out of them, watching out for any of the stone hands, for example, having such strong position, you're seeing that consistency there, the turning the 90 degrees, making sure you're getting all the totems stacked up together. All that stuff just coming in together just makes it so easy. They are dropping it down pretty low because you do have to make sure you're getting those totems down as quickly as possible, and I think they might have gotten knocked back a little bit. But the Drew is doing an excellent job, just having very strong control over the Grievous stacks, and one of the nicest things as a healer, having control of your Grievous stacks really focuses on isolating, specific targets, clearing them out, then focusing on the next ones, not trying to get everything done at once.
And a huge amount of help for those Grievous stacks, of course, as you know from the DK, with that consumption of 15-second uptime on Leech for the entire group with only a 45-second cooldown. That's a huge amount of uptime for everybody in the group as needed, especially when things start to get just a bit hairy, which I wouldn't know anything about. But for the group, getting all of that healing and topping everyone up past 90% to get rid of those Grievous stacks.
Well, being a healer and having a full head of luscious hair, I know when it can get hairy, all right? And that was immense control, immense powerful control there by Skyline D as they're getting ready to move into the next trash pack. And it looks like they're all just stealthing past, and they're stealthing past any of the Grub Masters there and just getting into the smaller pulls so they're able to tunnel down this Grub Master almost immediately.
I like what we're seeing this pattern play kind of from Skyline D. What they do is they like to avoid a couple of the trash packs, stealth past them, and get themselves in a prime position to already immediately AoE grip everything together, as opposed to kind of running and grabbing everything every time. So really good play from them, clearing out everything before Nerlex, which is the third boss of the dungeon, that huge worm boss, which is immobile, standing in that hole, which is where they need to fall into once they kill it in order to access the fourth boss.
Yeah, the interesting thing that we're going to be seeing here is with the fourth boss here, when you are having to focus on any of the mobs, they're going to be coming down, they're going to be praising the big worm and asking them to eat them. When you're having a full melee composition, you have to make sure that you're able to switch targets very easily. I mean, the Druid's able to, get a couple dots up, but usually the Moonfire, Sunfire is not going to be dealing too much.
Now, what's going to be interesting on this boss is we do have those Devoutes that jump over from the right side of your screen at home right now. We just see them come down. Usually a ranged handles those quite easily, whether it be a Shadow Priest in these Mythic Plus dungeons as they come in, or any type of dotting or ranged ad. Hunters deal with them quite well too. But in the case of this triple melee, they're really going to have to focus them down as soon as they come in. On the flip side, maybe they just won't care about them. If Nerlex, does manage to eat one of those Devoutes, he will gain a 50% damage buff for the remainder of the fight. Now, of course, it's not a tyrannical setting, but that adds up quite quickly. Looks like he will eat one of them right now, which is what he does, so there's 50%. Not to mention that at 20%, he will get a minor soft enrage for another 20% damage. So this could get pretty out of hand pretty quickly, Jack. There's a lot of damage coming in from that AoE spray that we're seeing right now.
Oh, there's absolutely a huge amount of damage there, and that's one of the concerning things where you're seeing that. I mean, you have the next Devout that's coming out, and the next Devout does get devoured. You have to see the extra pressure that's going to be on the healer, but there even was really phenomenal setup. I was actually really surprised that there wasn't, the switching targets of any of the melee there, because the Ursul's Vortex was down and D&D was down for the slows. But really, I guess they just don't need it because the boss is already at 30% at the very first Devour.
Yep. So the DK does do well to sky step away from the boss there, making sure that he's not eaten. Of course, if the tank during that chain is eaten as well, he as well will further buff the boss with another stack of that 50%. In the meantime, gets back in perfectly, making sure none of the melees get meleeed by the boss themselves. The Devouts do come back in here. Nerlex is just dropping so quickly that at this point, I would assume that they're just going to ignore these Devouts and try to finish the boss off.
You're seeing the perfect synergy between the two rogues, having such close positioning together. They're positioning themselves, they're able to leverage the extra Shuriken Storm to build up an extra combo point and get as much damage as possible into it. So while it is pushing a lot of pressure on the healer's doing, not too much damage there at all, it is worth it when they're able to just burn a boss so rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So Neuraxis, I kept saying Nerlex, I'm not sure why, but it is Neuraxis. I'm getting old, Jack. I'm getting old. So they do jump down the wormhole now. They are working their way to the last boss of the dungeon. Now, Jack, you be the one to talk about this. We do have the Scorpions coming up, and it is a fortified setting, plus Necrotic on the tank. Those Scorpions dish out a huge amount of damage on the group.
It's an absolutely huge amount of damage. One of the big things to note is that they are going to be hitting, say, for example, the furthest away targets. They're going to be prioritizing those over the ones they're going to be standing in very closely. So one of the biggest things is they're actually just stealthing past all this. They have a huge amount of trash percent done, and it looks like they're just going to be able to take these, pretty closely together. I'm looking to see if they're going to be
maybe everything together.
Yeah, maybe everything together. Yeah.
So they didn't pull both packs. No boss though. Now these are very dangerous.
Absolutely.
Right? Tons of damage on the group. Now we do have kind of those quasi pelters in there as well, dealing some damage to the group as well. But, I mean, they're just melting. Look at that damage going in on them right now from the 2 rogues. It should be no concern, but what are the concerns here for healer defense?
Well, there's no chances taken here by the rest of Druid. Instantly popping Incarnation, getting Haas out on everybody. You're seeing that tight stack. One of the nicest things about Incarnation, of course, is in addition to all the other healing that it's giving you, it does give you a ton of extra armor. So he's able to make sure that all the little bolts that are going to be going out are actually going to be focusing them. Is going to focus the rest of Druid. Is going to focus one of the rogues who is feigning. You know, when you have that concentrated area where you know the healing is going to be, it makes it so much easier to react. And when you're stacking everything together and just having such excellent single target damage, it's a breeze.
So, Dark Gruul, of course, the last boss here, well interrupted. Of course, that last trash pack by the Blood DK with the grip, not to get stunned at the end. Dark Gruul, the last boss here to be pulled, and once they're done, they're done. Now, the key element to this fight is that he does spawn this Molten Giant, this Molten Char skin, that if you kite him into the wall that he spawns, which spawn under players, he will get stunned and take 100% increased damage for about 15 seconds. It's prime time that you kill that Giant who fixates players, so it can't be tanked in the meantime, and does gain increasing speed stacks. That's when you want to kill him, and with the 2 rogues out there, it's absolutely no problem for them. Now, the tank also needs to be careful because of this frontal landslide. It will punch you away, followed by a huge fire cast from the boss. If the tank fails to activate or have active mitigation up during that cast, he will take a huge amount of damage and get punted very far away.
And one of the big things is control, especially when you have so much melee here. You're trying to reduce the mobility that's required out of them as much as you possibly can. You know, the Druid there is just baiting out all the crystal spikes, make sure they're in a safe and consistent area there. And really, as you're going to be seeing the Molten Crash coming out, you're seeing the tank repositioning. That way you're able to have it right on top of the crystal spikes, but the melee is still going to be able to get in there and dish out constant damage.
Yeah, really good positioning. So once the Magma Wave cast finishes here, it will shatter those remaining crystals there, and of course spawn some of the lava area under the players. It's kind of area denial, soft enrage of the boss, but they should have no concern finishing off the boss by then. Now we're entering another pattern here where he will spawn one wall followed by another ad in just a moment. There's the wall, there's the ad, excuse me. The wall has spawned just somewhere in the back, so they will need to kite it through. At this point, the boss is still too high to ignore the ad, so they will have to kill that last ad. In the meantime, Firefang, we are keeping an eye on them. They're still kind of moving through, albeit a bit slowly, moving up to Neuraxis, of course, the 3rd boss of the dungeon, so we'll keep an eye on them in the meantime. But, I mean, Skyline D just looking dominant here, Jack.
Well, it really shows between Skyline D and Firefang why Skyline D actually skipped past this pack. This is the pack that had a lot of the lurkers that are going to be spawning up in random areas, and of course, had that extra Grubmaster. It takes so much time. It's not that easy to actually get everything together, so that's why you're seeing so much extra trash, for example, that's not usually pulled. They take care of that earlier, then they're able to stealth past. You know, the trash is going to take a lot longer. That doesn't really want to stack up, and it really just shows the preparation of Skyline D. You know, having that theory craft, having the, the extra, going through the extra pulls and knowing what they can skip, what they can actually avoid.
So Dark Gruul here about to fall right now. I mean, Skyline D sweeping this series and looking just frankly like a well-oiled, well-trained machine.
0 deaths here by Skyline D. It shows the polish. You know,
it was basically what they almost did last time, right? Like last time they had the almost perfect run. Here they did have the perfect run. So kudos, Skyline D, well played. They will advance to that semi-final. And boy, we got a good start to the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. One team perhaps struggling just a little bit, but the other guy, Skyline D, looking on fire.
I mean, just well-oiled machine, like I said. I mean, every pull they did perfect, kited perfect. The DK stood in there just enough time. They had their mass stealths down. They had their pinpoint grip locations. They had the rogues stacking perfectly for Neuraxis. I mean, you could tell they've put a lot of practice and they're here to play.
Yep, and of course, Nell's Lair was the map choice from the other team coming out of Firefang in that one. And maybe they were hoping for some of the Rockmora kind of incidents and shenanigans we saw last time from the China region, but honestly, Skyline D were having none of that.
Well, it's pure confidence out of them. When they're taking extra mobs, for example, they're taking the extra drudges down the waterfall into Rockmora, it just shows the confidence that you guys are having. You know, it's one of the nice things you're talking about the kiting a lot of times. You're having the double rogues, you're having the double tricks of the trade, redirecting the threat. So even when you have to actually jump out of there, you really don't have to deal too much damage. Usually on live servers, you'll see tanks, for example, taking a lot of AoE-based trinkets, some of which are not available on the tournament realm. So right here, you're seeing, you're making up for not having certain items, not having, as much damage as they might have otherwise had. And really, that's the result. You get no deaths, just such a clean run.
Absolutely, and of course, we do have 8 series today, and it's a double elimination day, so both these teams will not only still be in the tournament, but also feature once again on today's broadcast. I think one of the big things we should talk about, though, is Skyline D. Because they advance in the upper bracket, they're looking very good, of course, to get into that top 2 that they need for the globals, but they're also going to be bumping up the affix, so we'll be seeing them in a plus 23 next time, up from that 22, and of course the scaling is such that once you get to those high levels, way beyond anything I've ever done, it means that you really have to play it to the very, very best. And do you think this double Rogue Demon Hunter is a composition that can really go all the way up to those 24s in the globals?
I mean, the only change we've really seen from what we saw in time trials was their healer, right? It was just the Holy Paladin to Resto Druid. So it seems like this is just one of those, wacky comps that you wouldn't expect to see on a lot of, streams or some of the players that you might know out there. And it's just, they're making it work. It's strats that they've just well ironed. I mean, they had almost, I mean, there's only so many pulls you could do, but they almost had as much as they could of a different pull pattern on Moth Souls compared to some of the other teams we've seen. So whatever works for them, it's working well.
Yeah.
What I like seeing most is, we always talk about having, the available information. The more that we're able to share the information, the more that we're able to get more well-oiled. We're going to, everybody's going to perform better. But when you have a region like China that's kind of cut off from everybody, you actually start seeing like, hey, we're breaking out of these meta comps. We're breaking out of what is generally accepted or what is best practices there. And you're saying, well, hey, it's still dominating. They're still putting up some excellent times.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the fun things. I mean, we talk about last year, right? Like China, maybe they didn't come in as the strongest region, although I think we can say that this team in the time trials did have a strong performance. But last year it was APAC, it was that Asia-Pacific region that caught everyone off guard, having both the teams in the global finals, Free Marcy, of course, taking it all. And everyone talks about Europe especially, but also North America. It's really nice to see these regions like really showing their stand on the global stage.
Not a single Windwalker monk. Between two teams already.
Fascinating.
Insane. But I mean, just like you said, it's really cool to see, and we saw it last year too, and with the time trials being so close together, it is very, very cool to see some different comps. I mean, I was joking kind of about the Windwalker thing, but you'd expect they're very strong right now in Mythic Plus, and they were not represented at all so far, and those are really impressive runs by Skyline D.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit to our partners in the China region as well about how these team names do come about, because I mean, there's a couple of Skylines here actually. In our next series, we're going to see Skyline Top playing against CBA. That'll be, of course, deciding who goes up against the two teams we just saw. And the Skyline brand is a little bit like the Method brand we were almost saying in the China region. It's like one of these kind of guilds that starts out with their original team. We said Skyline Top was actually more that original team, but then they've picked up Skyline D as kind of like their sponsored team. They're like eye in the sky, pie in the sky team that will represent them in the globals, and it's a little bit of extra pressure, but it certainly seems to be working out.
It is working out, but I'm really curious to see as this series develops for all of the regions actually, to see how many of these teams are the ones that were there to make a statement, and if we do see some of these teams that were there just to kind of we're good, we're qualified, we'll pull out the big guns for the tournaments coming up.
Well, it'd be interesting, as we talk about with making a reference to Method, right? So does that mean that we're going to be seeing, Skyline versus Skyline, just like we keep seeing Method versus Method?
Yeah, it's
Skyline
PvP and PvE now.
That's
Method's
right.
just all over the place. Skyline, maybe they are the China equivalent, but we are, of course, one series into the day now. Skyline D advanced to that semifinals, flying high, 2 sets. Death from Above fittingly saw them into that semi-final. Next up, the sister team, the original Skyline Top, will play against CBA. Stick with us, of course, the Mythic Dungeon Invitational is just getting started. One series down, but many more to go. Over the next weeks, we decide who is the best team in China.